Taylor Hayes had always been the picture of strength, elegance, and composure. She had faced so many obstacles in her life: lost loves, complicated family dynamics, and emotional struggles, but she had always managed to keep it together, to maintain control. But there was a darkness lurking behind her calm exterior, a secret that threatened to unravel everything she had worked so hard to build. It was a secret that only she knew, but the weight of it was crushing her every single day. Taylor had been diagnosed with late-stage liver cancer, a diagnosis that had devastated her. The doctors had given her a grim prognosis, only a few months to live, at best. It was a reality she hadn't been ready to face, and it was one she wasn't sure how to deal with. The idea of telling her family, her children, Ridge, and the people who loved her was too painful to even consider. She couldn't bear the thought of them watching her deteriorate, of them seeing her in a vulnerable state. She had always been the one to take care of others, to be the rock for everyone around her. To turn that role upside down, to ask for help, felt like a betrayal of everything she stood for. But as the days passed, Taylor's health continued to decline. The symptoms became harder to hide, the weakness more apparent. Her once vibrant and strong body was failing her, and she knew it. She was running out of time. And yet, despite the constant pain and fear, Taylor kept her secret, pushing it further into the depths of her heart, hoping that somehow it would go away, that it would just disappear. But she knew deep down that wasn't going to happen. The truth had a way of coming out, and it would eventually find its way to the people she loved the most. Deacon Sharp, ever the observant one, was the first to notice that something wasn't right. He had known Taylor for a long time, and he could see the subtle signs of pallor in her face, the weight she seemed to be carrying in her eyes. It wasn't just the usual stress of her complicated family life. This was something deeper, something darker. Deacon had learned to read people, to understand when something was wrong, and this time, he couldn't shake the feeling that Taylor was hiding something from him. One evening, as they sat together at her house, Deacon finally asked her directly, "Taylor, what's going on? I can see it in your eyes." "You're not telling me something." Taylor had tried to brush it off, to deflect the question with a smile, but Deacon wasn't having it. He gently reached out and touched her arm, his concern evident. "You can trust me, Taylor. Whatever it is, I'll be here for you." That's when Taylor finally broke down. Tears welled up in her eyes, and her face crumpled with the weight of the truth. She had kept it inside for so long, but now it was too much to bear. I've been diagnosed with liver cancer, Deacon. It's advanced. The doctors say I don't have much time left." Deacon's heart stopped. He had known Taylor was struggling, but this was something he hadn't even imagined. The woman he cared for, the woman who had always been so strong and confident, was facing her final days alone, and it shattered him. His mind raced, his emotions swirled in a storm of shock and disbelief. He had always cared for Taylor, had always seen a deeper connection between them, but this revelation threw him off balance. He wanted to do something, anything to help her, but the only thing he could do was listen. Taylor, on the other hand, was consumed with guilt and fear. She didn't want anyone to pity her, didn't want anyone to see her as weak. She had always been the one to take care of others, to be the protector. To let others care for her in this way was something she couldn't bear. "Please, Deacon," she begged, her voice trembling. "I don't want anyone to know. Not Ridge, not the kids. No one. I don't want their pity. I don't want them to look at me like I'm fragile or broken. I just want to live my life the best I can, even if it's just for a little while longer." Deacon's heart ached for her. He knew how difficult it must have been for her to ask him to keep such a devastating secret. And yet, he understood. Taylor didn't want to be treated differently. She didn't want to be seen as a person who needed saving. She wanted to hold on to the dignity and strength that had always defined her, even as her body betrayed her. But Deacon wasn't willing to let Taylor face this alone. He had seen her struggle in the past, had watched her face down difficult challenges, but this was something far beyond what she could handle on her own. He knew that the decision to keep her secret would weigh on him, but his love and concern for Taylor outweighed everything else. He agreed, reluctantly, to keep her condition a secret, but only because he knew it was what Taylor needed from him. "I won't tell anyone," Deacon promised, his voice thick with emotion. "But I'm not going anywhere. You're not going through this alone, Taylor. I'll be here, every step of the way. You don't have to carry this burden on your own." Taylor looked at him with a mixture of gratitude and sadness. She had always been independent, but she was beginning to understand that she didn't have to face everything alone. In that moment, she allowed herself to lean on Deacon, to accept the care and love he was offering. However, this decision came with its own consequences. Sheila Carter, the woman who had always been a thorn in the side of Taylor's relationships, soon caught wind of the situation. Sheila, driven by her own twisted obsession with Deacon, saw an opportunity to manipulate the situation to her advantage. She had never been able to stand the bond between Taylor and Deacon, and now, seeing Deacon's deep concern for Taylor, Sheila couldn't help but feel a surge of jealousy and possessiveness. Sheila's jealousy began to fester. She couldn't stand the thought of Deacon showing Taylor the kind of attention and care that Sheila craved for herself. Sheila, always calculating and manipulative, saw Taylor's illness as a weakness she could exploit. She knew that if she played her cards right, she could drive a wedge between Taylor and Deacon. After all, she was the one who had always been there for Deacon in the past. What was Taylor compared to her? Sheila started to plant seeds of doubt in Deacon's mind, making him question his loyalty to Taylor. She played on his emotions, reminding him of the time they had shared together, the history they had. Sheila's manipulations weren't overt, but they were insidious, and they worked. Deacon, torn between his loyalty to Taylor and his lingering feelings for Sheila, began to feel conflicted. But no matter how much Sheila pushed, Deacon knew where his heart truly lay. He couldn't abandon Taylor now, not when she needed him the most. His heart was torn, but he couldn't let Sheila's jealousy interfere with the promise he had made to Taylor. The last thing Taylor needed was drama and manipulation. She needed peace, love, and support in her final days. As Deacon's commitment to Taylor deepened, Sheila's jealousy turned into something more dangerous. She would stop at nothing to tear them apart, to make sure that Taylor's final days weren't spent with the man she loved. Sheila's actions would set the stage for a fierce battle, one that would test Deacon's loyalty, his resolve, and his heart. Would he continue to stand by Taylor's side, or would Sheila's schemes destroy everything they had fought for? The tension between the three of them, Deacon, Taylor, and Sheila, grew with each passing day. What started as a secret bond between Deacon and Taylor, built on trust and compassion, was now facing the threat of Sheila's manipulations. And as Taylor's illness progressed, the clock was ticking. Would Deacon stay true to his promise, or would Sheila's jealousy tear them apart in the end? For Taylor, the situation was becoming more complex by the day. She had always prided herself on her strength, but now, in the face of her mortality, she found herself caught in a web of jealousy, manipulation, and emotional turmoil. The last thing she wanted was to cause a rift between Deacon and Sheila, but she knew the time was running out. And in those final moments, Taylor would have to decide who she could truly trust and whether the love and loyalty she had always given would be enough to see her through this final chapter of her life. The air was thick with tension, uncertainty hanging over the lives of everyone involved. For weeks now, Rich Forrester had been trying to make sense of his relationship with Taylor. They had been through so much together, but there was always something unspoken between them. Their bond had been tested by the mistakes of the past, the complicated nature of their shared history, and the presence of Deacon Sharp, whose relationship with Taylor had been growing stronger. Rich had sensed a shift in Taylor, a subtle distance that he couldn't quite explain. She wasn't the same vibrant woman he had known. Something had changed. One afternoon, Rich was at the clinic for a routine checkup when he saw something that stopped him in his tracks. As he was leaving the building, he noticed Taylor and Deacon walking out of a private medical office. They were deep in conversation, but something about the way they were standing, the intensity in their expressions, raised alarm bells in Ridge's mind. It wasn't just the fact that they were together, it was the way Taylor looked. She appeared pale, her face drawn, and the way she leaned slightly on Deacon suggested she wasn't feeling well. Ridge's heart tightened with concern. He stood there for a moment, watching them, his thoughts racing. His first instinct was to assume that Taylor might be pregnant after all. They had discussed the possibility of starting a family together in the past. But something about this situation felt different, and Ridge's mind wouldn't allow him to settle on that assumption. He needed answers, and he needed them fast. Unable to shake the nagging feeling, Ridge approached Deacon as he and Taylor got into the car. He couldn't stand there and wonder anymore. He needed to know what was really going on. "Deacon," Ridge called, his voice firm but controlled. "What's going on with Taylor? Why is she looking like that?" Deacon paused for a moment, his face hardening as if he had been expecting this confrontation. He had been keeping Taylor's secret for so long, but now that Ridge was involved, it was clear he couldn't avoid the truth much longer. "She's going through something, Ridge," Deacon replied, his voice low and cautious. "Something that she doesn't want anyone to know about." Ridge's brow furrowed, his suspicions growing. "What do you mean? Is she sick? Did something happen?" Deacon hesitated for a moment before answering, his eyes betraying the weight of the situation. It's cancer, Ridge. Liver cancer. She's in the late stages, and there's not much the doctors can do." The words hit Ridge like a punch to the gut. His mind raced, trying to process the information. Taylor, the woman he had loved for so long, was dying, and he hadn't even known. He felt a wave of guilt wash over him, wondering how he could have missed the signs, how he could have been so blind to what was right in front of him. But the reality of the situation was too much to bear. Taylor, the woman who had always been a rock in his life, was facing the fight of her life, and he had no idea. "You knew about this?" Ridge asked, his voice trembling with a mix of shock and anger. "And you didn't tell me. You let her keep this secret." "She's my wife, Deacon. I have a right to know." Deacon stepped back, holding up his hands in a defensive gesture. "I didn't have a choice, Ridge. She made me promise she didn't want anyone to know. She didn't want pity. She just wanted to live the rest of her days on her own terms." Ridge's heart ached at the thought of Taylor carrying this burden alone. He couldn't understand why she would keep something so devastating from him. Why hadn't she trusted him enough to share the truth? But Ridge also understood Taylor's pride. She had always been independent, strong, even when the world around her was falling apart. She didn't want to be seen as weak. She didn't want to face the final chapter of her life as a victim. Ridge looked at Deacon, his expression hardening. "You should have told me." "But I get it. You were just trying to do what she asked." Deacon nodded, his expression softening with understanding. "I didn't want to hurt her more. I just wanted to be there for her in the way she needed. But now that you know, you need to be there for her too. She needs you, Ridge. You're the only one who can give her the kind of support she's been avoiding." Ridge felt the weight of Deacon's words sink in. He knew what he had to do. He couldn't let Taylor go through this alone. He had hurt her in the past, but now was his chance to make things right. Ridge knew he needed to step up, to be the man Taylor had always believed in. He couldn't let her face the end of her life without the love and support of her family. "I'm going to take care of her, Deacon," Ridge said, his voice steady. "I won't let her go through this alone. I'll be there for her, no matter what. And I won't let anyone stand in my way." Deacon looked at Ridge, his expression filled with both relief and sadness. He understood the complexity of the situation, but he also knew that Ridge was the one person who could give Taylor the peace she needed in her final days. Deacon had always cared for Taylor, and he would continue to be there for her, but Ridge was her husband. He was the one she needed most now. As Ridge walked away, heading straight to Taylor's home, he felt a new sense of purpose. He had to put aside his doubts, his fears, and focus on what really mattered. Taylor had always been the love of his life, and he would do whatever it took to make her final days as peaceful and fulfilling as possible. When Ridge arrived at Taylor's house, he found her sitting in the living room looking out the window. She appeared as calm and composed as ever, but Ridge could see the cracks in her armor. Her shoulders were slumped, and there was a weariness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. "Taylor," Ridge said softly, stepping into the room. "We need to talk." Taylor turned to face him, her eyes flicking to his, filled with a mixture of surprise and guilt. She hadn't expected him to find out, but now that he had, she couldn't hide from the truth any longer. "I know, Ridge," Taylor said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Deacon told you, didn't he?" Ridge nodded, his heart aching as he looked at her. "I don't know why you kept this from me." "I'm your husband, Taylor. I should have been there for you from the beginning." Taylor shook her head, her voice filled with emotion. "I didn't want to burden you, Ridge. I didn't want you to see me like this. I've always been the one who takes care of everyone else. I didn't want to be weak." Ridge moved toward her, kneeling beside her chair. "You're not weak, Taylor. You're the strongest person I know. But you don't have to go through this alone. I'm here now. I'm not going anywhere." Taylor's eyes filled with tears as she reached out to take his hand. "I'm so scared, Ridge. I'm scared of leaving you, of leaving the kids. But I don't know how to fight this. I don't know if I can even face it." "You don't have to fight it alone," Ridge said, squeezing her hand. "We'll face this together, Taylor." Every step of the way, for the first time in weeks, Taylor felt a sense of peace wash over her. She had kept the secret for so long, carrying the weight of it alone, but now, with Ridge by her side, she no longer had to bear that burden on her own. Together, they would navigate the difficult road ahead. But as they sat together, the future uncertain, Ridge couldn't shake the feeling that there were more challenges ahead. He wasn't the only one who cared for Taylor, and Deacon, despite his promises, had made his own emotional attachment to her. The jealousy, the tension, and the unresolved feelings that still simmered between Deacon and Ridge would only complicate things further. For now, though, Ridge focused on what mattered most, being there for Taylor in her time of need. He had missed so much in the past, but he was determined not to let her down now. The battle was far from over, but Ridge was ready to fight for the woman he loved, no matter what it took.